It is now my privilege to moderate a panel discussion among 5 distinguished state attorneys general, focusing on critical initiatives on civil legal aid that those offices are pursuing. Let me introduce our panelists. Josh Kaul was sworn in as Wisconsin's 45th Attorney General in January 2019. He is a former prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore. Prior to his public service, Josh worked many years in private practice at Jenner and Block, as well as Perkins Coie in Madison. He co-chaired the Vote Safe Wisconsin Bipartisan Coalition and is a member of the Wisconsin Department of Justice's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. Karl Racine was sworn in as the District of Columbia's first elected Attorney General in 2015 and was reelected to a second term in 2018. He is the president of the Bipartisan National Association of Attorneys General and chair emeritus of the Democratic Attorneys General Association's Executive Committee. Over the course of Karl's career, he has worked at the DC Public Defender Service as Associate White House Counsel to President Bill Clinton and became the first African-American managing partner of a top 100 American law firm. Ellen Rosenblum has served as 3 terms as Oregon's first woman Attorney General since being elected in 2012. She is a former federal prosecutor and state trial and appellate judge. She served on the executive committee of the National Association for Attorneys General and is former chair of the Conference of Western Attorneys General. Moving around the Zoom box and the country, next we have Herbert Slattery III, who was appointed in 2014 by the Tennessee Supreme Court to serve an 8-year term as Attorney General and reporter for the state of Tennessee. He previously practiced law privately at Edgerton, McAfee, Armistead, and Davis before serving as counsel to Governor Bill Haslam in 2011. He is the co-chair of the Charities Committee and co-chair of the Finance Committee of the National Association of Attorneys General. And I'm hopeful we have with us now, or we will shortly, there he is, Doug Peterson. Attorney General Peterson was elected as Nebraska's 32nd Attorney General in November 2014 and was reelected in 2018. He formerly served as Assistant Attorney General in the Nebraska AG's office and as Lincoln County Attorney. He is a member of the State of Nebraska Board of Pardons and serves as co-chair of the National Association of Attorneys General Consumer Protection Committee. Welcome to you all and thank you for joining us. Before we jump into our discussion, I want to particularly thank you all publicly for recently joining 41 state attorney generals in letters to the United States House and Senate expressing support for robust funding for LSC. I want to particularly thank Karl Racine and Doug Peterson for leading those efforts. And this is a big deal. When it comes to federal funding for civil legal aid, the voices of so many bipartisan attorneys general carry enormous credibility and weight. We are profoundly grateful for your support. And again, for being here with us today. So let's get right down to our conversation. For starters, it would be great if each of you could provide an overview of your office's work, the scope of your work, priorities, the effect of COVID, whatever you want to highlight. Karl Racine, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ron. And it is a great pleasure to join you all with my sterling colleagues who are also on this panel. I certainly look forward to their remarks. Let me start by letting everybody know that if I seem to be biased in favor of Ron, it's because I am. He's a friend. And I know Ron from his, incredible commitment to legal services and all that he does for the community in the greater Washington, D.C. area. As Ron pointed out, for nearly 50 years, LSC has been filling the gap that exists from private counsel to pro bono counsel to local legal services providers. The fact is that families and individuals who need legal counsel still need to rely on Legal Services Corporation because our AG offices, as well as the pro bono community, simply can't do it all alone. And so we're thrilled to partner with LSC. And I appreciate your noting the bipartisan overwhelming support for the Legal Services Corporation that was exhibited by the 41 AG letter sign-on supporting LSC. Just to let you know that support is quite strong. And LSC has a friend in the National Association of Attorneys General and individual attorneys general. So when I think about access to justice, I think about the people who work really hard to do their jobs, feed their families, and make ends meet. These are the folks who very rarely, if ever, complain. Whether they're immigrants, minorities, low-income individuals, or women, all too often, these individuals know when something is not right. But too often times, they do not get the help that they need. As attorneys general, we all have our own distinct areas of jurisdiction. Many of us are our jurisdiction's chief law enforcement officers. Many of us are our state's chief legal officers. And others of us are responsible to hold bad actors accountable, particularly when they hurt people who don't always have a voice. In my own office, what we've sought to do is focus in on a couple of endemic problems in the District of Columbia, namely affordable housing and the panoply of issues that relate to the absence of affordable housing in the District of Columbia. And also, we've been focused on wage theft, which simply is an occurrence where employers, unfortunately, don't pay workers what the law requires that they minimally be paid. And in that regard, that's where we have seen our work be complementary to that of the LSC, as the individuals who we're helping with respect to the housing cases, as well as the wage theft cases, are folks who simply don't have the ability to engage an outside counsel to help them. So Ron, that's my introduction, and perhaps we'll come back and I can go into more detail when we come back.
That's great, and that's exactly what we'll do. Doug Peterson, again, thank you for your help on the National Association's letter. Tell us about your work in Nebraska.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. That letter was really very easy for me to work with Carl on, just because I've become, frankly, should have become more informed about the work being accomplished by, in our case, Legal Aid of Nebraska. But about 3 or 4 years ago, I was asked to serve on the Supreme Court organized an access to justice committee. And in that, I really got a better idea of what Legal Aid Nebraska is up to and how they meet such a critical need, and worked with their executive director, Milo Mumgard, was so impressed both by his leadership. He oversees over a staff of around 50 lawyers across the state of Nebraska. But I think the bigger thing that really hit me in getting to know Milo and the work they're doing and what we're doing on this committee is how critical the need is, because it's a fundamental issue to our whole judicial system. It's so critical as far as credibility of the institution that access not be based upon funds in order for it to have I think what our founding fathers intended for it to have. So anyway, I was in private practice for 30 years and it did pro bono work, but I never fully appreciated how this area of legal services really are until I got on that committee. So drafting up that letter and speaking with Milo about how the needs were being met in Nebraska, I could do that in a heartbeat and continue to try to make it clear to our federal elected officials how important this service is for citizens across the state. In a lot of ways, that segment that Legal Aid of Nebraska is addressing, we address in the same way in consumer protection or try to help. It's interesting though how many, I know within the national organization, there's a large population of seniors who need the services that you have. And in the same way in consumer protection, we're trying to meet the needs of the seniors. Those who veterans in Nebraska, rural residents are a significant portion of the legal services you provide. And also for us working with a large population of rural residents in Nebraska, making sure that they are aware of the consumer protection laws that we have and the services that we provide. But in wrapping up, I just want a little bit of an irony to drive home the point of the need. Yesterday afternoon, I was in my office and I was just going through some material preparing for today's video, and my mainline phone rings. Typically, it's always my cell phone. I rarely get a call on the line there. I picked the phone up and I thought it was one of the members of the executive team calling me. And I said, "This is Doug." And it turned out, she goes, "Yeah, the governor's office just gave me your number." Kind of interesting that the governor's office is giving my direct line. But sure enough, it reminded me of private practice, because I was talking to a woman and she said that they lived out in Western Nebraska, out in Alliance. Her husband was a railroader and lost his job a year ago last June. And she said the bank is now just telling us that we have to start making up payments, that our payments gone from $1,000 to like $3,000 a month, and that we have to catch up for the last year in which they were not charging on the mortgage. And so it was very interesting. She didn't know who she was talking to, and we kept it that way. But it was just interesting going through, and it was helpful for me to happen to have Legal Aid of Nebraska's material in front of me. And I said, "Well, let's see, you're in Alliance. Let me give you the Scottsbluff number." And I said, "And we'll reach out to them." And I said, "Then I'll talk to our people in consumer protection and we'll follow up in about a week to see how it's going and if you met your needs." But I just thought it was kind of ironic to be preparing for today's video, looking through some of the material, and then lo and behold, getting the call. I thought that kind of puts an exclamation point on how important what this really is, because you can hear it in their voices.
Absolutely.
I must say, I get calls like that, not infrequently, but now that I've heard what you just said, if I get any calls from Nebraska, I'm going to send them to you.
Direct line.
Doug will give us that number to us.
General Rosenblum, can you tell us about your office in Oregon and what you're seeing there?
Of course. Thank you, Ron. But first, I'll give out my cell phone number. Just kidding. I'm just honored to be with you all this morning or this afternoon, as the case may be. And first, I want to thank our legal aid partners, directors, lawyers, staff, and clients. I learned so much from all of you. We have a very robust program here in Oregon, of course, and I'm so proud of our Lawyers Campaign for Equal Justice that you probably know at least a little bit about. But every year for the past over 25 years, we're close to 30 now, I believe, or over, we raise money, the lawyers ourselves, and we provide that to our legal services programs, in addition, of course, to supporting the budget, the federal budget for the corporation. So really proud of that work. And I really appreciate your recognition, Ron, of the overlap that we have in the state AG offices with the work of legal aid. We truly are partners. We need to be. There's just so much to do, and frankly, not enough resources on either side to make it all happen. But we are doing what we can. And along those lines, my wonderful colleagues, we work together very closely on a bipartisan basis. I look at this group and I don't think Republican, Democrat, I think about their states, I think about the district, which we hope will be a state, and I think about how we work together particularly well on consumer protection issues. We are really dedicated to that. I've joined up with Doug recently on some letters regarding consumer protection issues, and we really do work together. I think, frankly, better than just about any other offices in the country that are elected on a partisan basis. So I'm just going to put that in. This is obviously not a political discussion, but I wanted to just mention that one of the things in my past that I don't even really have on my resume, but which to me is very special, is that when I was a young lawyer in Eugene, Oregon, in private practice for a few years, I team taught the legal aid clinic at our law school with the director of legal aid and with one of the legal aid lawyers. And it was one of the most enjoyable and important jobs that I've had. And some of my students became really fantastic, some of the best judges and lawyers at legal aid in Oregon. So I feel very proud of that, but also very proud that one of the people I met at that time was everybody was young then, a young investigator paralegal by the name of Suzanne Bonamici. And you probably know Congresswoman Bonamici from Oregon. She's our only woman in Congress from our state, and she got her start at legal aid as well. So you can kind of see where we are informed by where we come from our backgrounds. And I am as well. But as Attorney General, and I am serving the beginning of my third term now, I wanted to mention a couple of the things that we do that I think are particularly relevant to the work that you do at the Legal Services Corporation and throughout the country in our legal aid offices. One of my top priorities is protecting consumers, including in particular seniors, immigrants, and students who are saddled with debt. $1.7 trillion outstanding in student debt in this country at this time. That is just unfathomable. And as we know, loans are now going to come due again, right? Similar to the eviction situation, we now have student debt, which is going to come due this fall. And I'm very proud to say that in Oregon, we passed our Student Borrower Bill of Rights, finally, third time's a charm, just this last session, whereby now all of our student loan servicers must be licensed, and we are going to have our own robust ombuds program for complaints regarding student loan servicers. This is a very critical thing right now, because if you don't have an honest and a strong and a helpful student loan servicer, that's the difference between being able to move on with your life or being saddled for life with debt and with the inability, frankly, to move on and to have the life that you were hoping your education was going to provide for. Another area that I want to talk about is the work that we do regarding reforms to our criminal justice system, especially to reduce disparate racial impacts on Oregonians of color in my state. My office has led efforts here to curb police profiling, to reduce, hopefully eliminate hate crimes and bias incidents, and to expand transparency through access to public records. So we lead task forces that then lead to, hopefully, and they have in those three instances, substantial impacts from legislation that we're able to get passed in these areas. I've also been working recently with my office through our Crime Victims and Survivors Services Division. We have an entire division devoted to this, to expanding access to justice in our most underserved communities through what we call our community conversation sessions, where we invite community-driven reforms to our justice system, and in particular to how we approach our work with regard to serving crime victims and survivors. We've also made huge inroads into fighting human trafficking in Oregon. We have a program where we set up multidisciplinary teams in every county throughout the state, some of which didn't even know they had a problem with human trafficking, frankly, and now they've learned to recognize it and to help make people safe and to prosecute where appropriate. So I could go on. I have all kinds of scribbles, but I know I'm limited to 4 minutes. So let me stop, and happy to get a little more in depth if we have time later on.
Thank you. Attorney General Slattery, tell us about Tennessee.
Well, thank you, Ron, for including Tennessee on this panel, and it's great to see my colleagues. Actually, I think you'll pick up pretty quickly, if you haven't already, that we really do enjoy working with each other. And Ellen, she said it better than I can say it, but we work on a bipartisan basis, and frankly, it's one of the few places that I see in our country where we really solve problems, and we solve them together. And I'll just be honest with you, I love working with these folks, the people on the panel and our other colleagues. A lot of people ask me, what has anything surprised you about being an AG? And I said, well, I didn't realize that I would interact so much with AGs from other states, but that's been a really pleasant surprise and inspiring, to be honest with you, especially in the environment we live in today. So, you know, Tennessee, we're a little different because we just last year we were able to, by statutory change, move our Division of Consumer Affairs from an executive department into our office. Probably everybody else on this call has a division already in their office. So we're experiencing something new, which is great. We can take the folks who get the complaints and they can walk down the hall and, you know, talk to a lawyer. So just structurally, we're in a much better place. To give you a little snapshot of our office, we've got probably 345 positions. Half of those are women, to be honest. A lot of women are in our leadership. And we've got 4 satellite offices. But one area that, the Legal Aid Society is the largest nonprofit law firm in Tennessee. So it's vital for the support of consumers. And our offices complement each other really well. The Legal Aid Society can represent individual consumers. We cannot. We represent the state's interest. Now, we may take action against a particular company or something on behalf of the state that would affect consumers, like data breaches and things like that. But we can't represent individuals. So that function is really, really important to us. So we try to work with them. A good example, I looked at some of our statistics, and we have between 4,000 and 4,200 consumer complaints a year. And last year, 300 of those related to landlord-tenant issues. And this is an area where I think the Legal Aid Society is very effective, more effective than we are. But we work with them because we don't have unlimited funds, but we do have funds that can be dedicated to education. And so we worked with them on a program that resulted in a publication, a handout that we had ready to rent. It's like this. It's printed in two different languages, in Spanish and in English. And we worked with them to get that into the hands of the folks that really needed it. And our office, when we're explaining things, I tell people we need to, as one law professor who was teaching the bar review to me years ago would say, we're going to put the cookies on the low shelf tonight. And so I think you need to be simple in how you explain things. So we use frequently asked questions, FAQs, a lot. And this publication was just like that. And we did a similar thing with handout during COVID on what tenants' rights are, so that just people would know that the rent's not being forgiven. What they would do if the rent's if they try to collect the rent, if they they terminate their utilities, those types of things. That's where people really live. And I know I'll just close with one one story. I think it was like my third or fourth day in the office, and I met with our consumer folks. And this is where I was the start of my draw into consumer matters. And they shared this story about this 80-year-old woman who was hotboxed for a timeshare purchase, and I think it was like $25,000 or something like that, a lot of money. And they went through and how they treated her and this sort of thing. And then I think they were sort of testing me, and they said, well, we could file suit or we could do this. And I looked at them and I said, why did you not file suit last week? And they all of a sudden they sat up in their chairs and said, hey, he's serious about this. So consumers are, I wonder whether we're effective or not. But at times, because I don't get the immediate feedback, but I did get a call a few days ago from my the head of consumer affairs, and they said, do you know a Carrie Slatery? And I said, I happen to know a Carrie Slatery. She's my wife. And she said, she's written a complaint that we need to follow up on. And my wife was working with a Hispanic woman who, I mean, she was taken to the cleaners by a used car dealer. And I said, well, I don't know why you're calling me. Just treat her like anybody else. But I do know my wife would not have called on somebody that would be ineffective. So that was really good feedback for me. So in any event, Ron, thank you for including me. I look forward to hearing from General Call.
Josh Call, thank you. Thank you for your patience. What's going on in my original home state of Wisconsin?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I'm not sure today how the internet connection is in your home state, so we'll see how this goes. But I want to thank you for having me be a part of this. I want to thank my colleagues who are on the line. I certainly echo the thoughts of others. And I want to thank the Legal Services Corporation for all of the work that you do around the country to help make laws on paper a reality for so many people. Our mission at the Wisconsin Department of Justice is to protect the public and ensure that justice is done. And we do that in a variety of different ways. We have a significant criminal function, and we investigate and prosecute some of the most serious offenses. We do a lot to protect public health, and that has certainly been a major challenge during the pandemic, and we've devoted a lot of time and resources to that. We do environmental protection and consumer protection work. And then we also do a lot of work relating to the protection of people's rights. And as you heard from my colleagues, one of the great things about the job is that we work across state lines, often in a bipartisan fashion, to work on sort of big picture issues that impact consumers or impact our environment around the country. And we get a lot done as a result of that. And it's a lot of fun to see those resolutions as you work through these cases. To touch on a couple of the ways that I think work together most effectively with the legal services work that is done around the state. And they're both sort of indirect, but it shows how our roles complement each other. One is an area that people have talked about a little bit, which is the consumer protection space. We would all, I think, love to handle every case that comes in the door where is defrauded or where there is a consumer violation. But I think if anybody here just looks at their cell phone in a day, you know how many robocalls we get, and our offices unfortunately just don't have the resources to go after every robocall and every violation. And different states set up their enforcement regimes in different ways. But what we certainly look at, and what I suspect the others on the line do, is where can we use our resources in a way that's having a big impact? And to know where you can have that impact with your resources, having those individual cases handled helps you see where the patterns are. They help you see what some of the challenges are. And the work that lawyers do pro bono or through legal services programs can help develop those patterns. And so we can see that there is a particular type of harm that's occurring in a particular area. And it then gives us a basis to dive into an area further and potentially do broader policy or legal policy changes, whether it's an enforcement project or advocating for changes in the law. But without the kind of work done on the front end in individual cases, it's much harder to know what's happened to people and where those resources should be used. A second area that I think is really important for us is victims' rights. We had victims' rights in Wisconsin. We were, I think, the first state to pass victims' rights provisions, and we recently passed Marsy's Law. And there are a lot of rights provided for victims, but victims don't typically get counsel assigned as a criminal defendant does. And those rights aren't that meaningful if people don't know what they mean and they don't have people representing them. And we're fortunate to have services providers who do an outstanding job, as I'm sure my colleagues in the line do in their states as well. But there are times when the victim of a crime may want legal representation. They may want to make sure that their rights are protected. Their interests may be at odds with those of somebody else involved in a case. Having people who can help folks through that process, who can talk about what their rights are, can really transform the criminal justice process for a victim as they're going through that process. For those of us who are used to the process, we're familiar with all the stages and everything that goes into a criminal case. But for most folks who are not part of the criminal justice system in their work day in and day out, it can be a really intimidating process. It can be overwhelming. It can be hard to get updates on your cases. And having an attorney who can walk you through that and who can make sure that they're asserting your rights when you need to can really be invaluable. And that's, I think Herbert put this really well, where he said the issues that are impacting people where they live. There are big major issues that get a lot of attention, but there are a lot of issues that can slip through the cracks because of lack of resources, whether it's a loan debt issue or an eviction issue or what have you. And having lawyers who can help make those laws a reality for people, I think really helps make the protections we have in our different state codes and in federal law meaningful for people in our communities. So I look forward to the discussion, and thanks again for having me.
Well, thanks again. I'd like each of you to take really just a minute or so, because we're running down, to maybe highlight or give a few more details on one of your more significant initiatives. And I think collectively what it's going to show is the breadth of the work that really you all do and is done across the country by other state attorneys general. Josh Kaul, let's stick with you. Domestic violence is a huge issue for legal aid programs, and it's a growing issue during the pandemic. I know your office has a significant sexual assault initiative. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, we have a sexual assault kit initiative. It spanned multiple administrations. It was in place prior to my becoming AG, and we continue to pursue it. As a lot of states have, Wisconsin identified thousands of untested sexual assault kits that had not been submitted for testing. We've now tested all of the kits that were designated for testing, and one of the things that has shown is that there are cases that if the testing had occurred at the time the kit was submitted, the person who committed a violent crime may have been identified, and justice could have been achieved for victims much sooner. One of the things that we've been doing is advocating for policy changes and an ally in lawyers who represent victims, and they can talk about the rights that victims have, and they've come forward and advocated for the kinds of policy changes that would help empower victims. But it's a great example of how having an advocate for a victim can help lead to greater justice. In a lot of these cases, if there had been a legal services attorney representing a victim, who knows how that would have changed what happened with the case. But having somebody who advocate, we all know the difference that an advocate can make. And it is as true in the context of sexual assault victims as it is in lots of others. And so we have worked as a result to strengthen our practices and hopefully to prevent any kind of similar backlog from ever happening again.
Thanks so much. Attorney General Slattery, in 2019, LSC released a report on the opioid crisis and the role that civil legal aid programs could provide and the support legal aid programs can provide individuals and families trying to recover from opioid use disorder and substance use disorder. I know this is an issue that many state attorneys general are focused on, and you're a leader among them. Could you tell us about your work in that area with opioids?
Sure, thank you, Ron. this has been a problem for a long time. Our office actually started back in 2016. I think last year there were 96,000 overdose deaths. I think in Tennessee we have 5 people a day who die from overdose deaths. So it is an extremely urgent problem that we're trying to work together. And I don't think there's anybody on this call or listening that hasn't been touched in one way or another by the epidemic, and it's really profoundly sad. We began working. I think just to give you the scope, there was some testimony in federal court a couple of years ago by a doctor in Stanford who wrote a book called Drug Dealer MD, and she basically stood up and told the judge that I'm the problem, or I'm a physician, but I've been trained to prescribe opioids for pain. So that you've got the physicians, the manufacturers are saying, well, we just manufactured FDA approved prescription drugs. You have the distributors that are involved. They say they're just truckers. And then you've got the pharmacies that fill the prescriptions, and they say they're just filling prescriptions authorized by physicians. So, the bottom line is nobody's at fault, but then we've got this incredible epidemic. So how did that happen? And so we began an investigation. And when I say we have 50 states and 6 territories that have AG. So there's 56 entities involved in this. Every one of the AGs on this call have been involved in it. Frankly, I learned a lot just from Wisconsin early on. They were way ahead on the programs and teaching folks about it. But it basically has come down to 3 sort of approaches. There's a multi-state investigation that involves virtually all the states and territories that's been going on, targeting manufacturers, 3 distributors in particular. There are, I think, 2 bankruptcies. Purdue Pharma, which was the bad actor in it, is in bankruptcy, and Mallinckrodt, another manufacturer, is in bankruptcy. And then, so the multi-state, that's where we work together. And one of the advantages is we can issue civil investigative demands, which we call CIDs, to these companies and get information without filing a lawsuit, being subject to discovery and all the things that sort of complicate matters. So there's some real advantages that AGs bring to the table, especially if there are multiple states involved. The best example of that is the multi-state, the master settlement agreement with the tobacco manufacturer. So it's one thing to get a letter or demand from one AG, but when you get them from 40, you're going to get some attention. So there's a multi-state investigation. Then states have also filed actual lawsuits against these parties. And then there's what we call a multi-district litigation that involves 3,000 suits, including centered in federal court in Cleveland, Ohio. They've got about 3,000 cases up there. So it may be the most complicated piece of litigation that we've seen. So we've been working on that, and we're hopefully, the bankruptcies are extremely expensive, but the idea is to get these companies and hold them accountable for what they've done. They need to be held accountable, but also to get funds that would, as we say, solve the problem. And in order to do that, we've got to get funds to the states until, and then everything's local. So, we need to get treatment programs, drug courts, things that really work that can stem the epidemic. And we're making some progress, frankly, but we need to get some things across the finish line to really accomplish it. But people are working hard, particularly the states are really working really hard on trying to bring some sort of resolution quickly.
So keep up the good work, and just remember you have allies, not in the enforcement arena, but in the recovery arena in your legal aid programs. Ellen Peterson, you mentioned a whole raft of initiatives could you pick one of them, maybe your elder abuse unit or your hate crimes work, to give us a few more details on what you're doing?
Listen, we have so much going on, but I'll be brief regarding two of our initiatives I'm really proud of. Of course, Carl Racine is the leader this year of the National Association, and he has chosen hate crimes as his focus. So I almost always want to defer to Carl because he's doing such amazing work in this area, but I do want to put a plug in for the work we do. And in fact, we're speaking to NAG today on a panel, I think maybe with Carl in about an hour, about our hate crimes hotline that we were able to get through some legislation. I had led a task force on hate crimes, and our legislature was good enough to provide us with some funding this past session. They have provided us with even more because sadly, what we've discovered is that it is an even bigger problem than we thought. But we now have a statewide hate crimes hotline that anyone, doesn't require it to be a crime. We actually call it a bias incident hotline because we want people to know that it doesn't have to be a crime. It doesn't have to be something you can refer to the district attorney for criminal prosecution to be hurtful and to be to result in trauma to the individual who is targeted, as well as to their family and their community. As an example, just this last July, it is July now, so July 1st, I received the second annual report of the statistics on our hotline, and we saw a shocking 134% surge in reporting in the second half of 2020. Most of those reports related to race-based targeting, primarily of Black and African-American people, but also reports of anti-Asian bias surged, paralleling the beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic, the protests following the George Floyd killing, and the national election. And then finally, on just to put in a plug for my elder abuse team, since 2016, I was able to get funding to appoint a statewide elder abuse prosecutor, and even, I'll have to say, even as important or more importantly, two highly skilled investigators. We now provide support to any district attorney's office in the state that requests it, or local law enforcement, because quite honestly, they can't handle all these cases themselves. They don't have that level of expertise. And this year, we're proud to host our 5th annual Elder Abuse Conference, where we actually gather law enforcement together and we conduct trainings to equip our state's law enforcement and other public servants with the ability to protect our elders from exploitation. Lots more to add, but maybe another time.
Thank you so much. Doug Peterson, I've got the right first name with the right last name. We've heard a lot from pretty much all of you about consumer protection and how important that is. And I know your office focuses on that and has a consumer protection kit. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work in that area?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. You know what I would want to do before that, though, and I didn't do it in my opening comments, is I'm so impressed by the work done by both the Legal Service Corporation and Legal Aid of Nebraska. I just think of the scripture. It says, "As you do to the least of these," and those are the people out there in our communities, whether it's an urban area or a small area, low income. And when the sense of power is pressed against them and they have nowhere to go, that's a pretty helpless feeling. So I think some of your people are on watching this video, and I just personally want to thank them because, as I said earlier, if we don't within our system make all the citizens of our country and of our states know that they have the ability to be represented and to have legal counsel, we have failed. You know, we have failed as lawyers, we've failed as citizens. And all of us have different backgrounds, but I don't have to go too far to think of my own mom working as a sales clerk. Has she been in a legal hassle? Now, my mom was German and she knew how to get 10 cents out of a nickel. So we didn't have any collectors at our door. But, you know, for these, particularly in my mind, single moms going through the legal struggles, whether it's with landlord tenant, whether it's healthcare cost, which I think is a big area where we in the consumer protection area of AGs could make a difference and need to do more. But what I admire about your team of people across the nation is they're at it day in and day out. They have their docket calls, they have courtroom, they have the clients in their offices day in and day out, meeting the needs of the least of us, the least of these. And all I can say to that is a big thank you. Our legal system needs it. We will continue on consumer protection to fight the fights. But those are also day in, day out. We have a consumer fair response team where people call in and we will evaluate, but we're somewhat limited to our statutory authority that it has to be deceptive trade practices and things of that nature. Whereas on an individual basis of a legal need, your team of people are out there making a difference. And so it's an honor for me to be a part of just a little bit of that process. But the most of all, I just want to say a sincere thank you for being in the, standing in the trenches and working hard to protect the legal rights of these people.
Thank you so much. Carl Racine, I think we batted around and you're up again, having led off.
All right. Well, okay. So very quickly, and I certainly associate myself with the, really profound remarks of my colleagues, and certainly Doug Peterson just made some immediately before I started talking. Very quickly, we found that standing up our consumer mediation program has been incredibly beneficial to DC residents. That's a program where we have trained mediators. Now there are 3 of them under really strong leadership of a wonderful man named Tim Shuri. And basically what we do is we will help a consumer mediate an issue that they have with a provider of a good or a service. We'll help draft letters, we'll stick with it, we'll do everything short of filing suit. I'm happy to say that consumers have been restituted. So we've gotten serious money back, over $3 million over the years, to consumers through the mediation program. And again, I want to make the point that oftentimes certain consumers don't really want to complain. You almost have to, ask really specific and detailed questions to have the complaint really fully fleshed out so they can get some relief. Secondly, we worked on the ground with legal service providers and consumers to provide emergency debt collection legislation in DC that would provide safety, if you will, during the pandemic to people who are incredibly vulnerable. So we're quite proud of that. The third point, I think I'm piggybacking off of Josh now. We can't be the city's landlord and tenant lawyer. We simply don't have, unfortunately, the resources. But what we can do is we can go to landlord-tenant court, as our team does, and we can get to know the lawyers who are pro bono or legal services and other organizations who are doing the individual work so that we're aware of broader trends that may be taking place in a manner that is being executed on pattern and practice basis that is really injuring poor residents. And so our housing conditions work has been a mainstay of our office, and it derives from the close engagement and interaction with folks who are helping residents in landlord-tenant court. One statistic from Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, coming out of the Great Recession, 2008 and 9, 99% of landlords are represented in landlord-tenant court. 96% of tenants are not. And as we know, the average age coming out of that time period of someone who was evicted was 9 years old. What that means is it was a mom with several kids. And of course, we're going to face that again in the coming eviction tsunami. So I would certainly look forward to working with legal services on those issues. I mentioned wage theft, but we'll get that another day. Thanks, Ron.
Well, thanks to all of you. Thanks to Attorneys General Carl Racine, Rosenblum, Slattery, Peterson, for being with us today. But more importantly, thank you for the work you do every day to protect the health, the welfare, and the safety of our neighbors around the country. We at LSC and our grantees really look forward to continuing to partner with you. Thank you so much.